The ambulance arrived. The paramedics filed their report. The patient was logged, transferred, and admitted. By morning, every record was gone. The patient never existed, according to the hospital. But 2 paramedics remember her face. How many times has something like this happened, and nobody said a word? Tonight, someone's finally talking. I've been a paramedic for 11 years. I've worked nights on some of the worst roads in the north of England. I've pulled people out of cars that looked like crushed tin cans. I've held the hands of strangers in the last minutes of their lives and watched the light go out of them on the side of a dual carriageway at 3 in the morning. I've seen things that stay with you, the kind that surface at odd moments, in the middle of a meal or just before sleep, quiet and uninvited. None of it broke me. What happened at Milford General Hospital on the 14th of February last year, that came close. And what I found out 3 weeks later came closer still. It started the way most strange things start on night shifts. Quiet. Too quiet. Marcus and I had run 2 calls before midnight. A slip and fall in Accrington, an elderly man with chest pains in Burnley, and by 1:30, we were parked outside the A&E Bay at Milford, drinking terrible coffee from the vending machine and talking about nothing in particular. The fog had been thick all week, the kind that sits low and doesn't move, pressing down on the motorway and the terraced streets and the old mill buildings at the edge of town, making the streetlights look like distant moons seen through cotton wool. That's when the call came through. Sophia's voice on the radio, steady as always. Female, mid-20s, unresponsive, found collapsed on the pavement outside the old textile mill on Moorside Lane. No identification, no phone. Caller had already disconnected. We were there in 4 minutes. She was lying against the wall of the mill, knees pulled up, arms crossed over her chest, in a way that looked almost deliberate. Dark hair spread across her face, no visible injuries. No bag, no keys, no phone, nothing in her pockets. When I crouched down and swept the hair back, she couldn't have been more than 19, 20 at most. Her skin was cold, not the cold of the February night air, but the deeper cold that stops you. The kind that registers somewhere in your chest before your brain has processed it. Marcus checked her pulse before I did. He looked at me over her body and didn't say anything. I found it. Faint. Slow. But there. We got her on the stretcher and into the ambulance, and I worked on her the whole way to Milford. No response to stimulus. Her breathing was shallow but regular, and her eyes, when I checked them, were open just a fraction, just enough to catch the light from my torch and reflect it back like something was watching from a very long way down inside her. I've seen that look before, on people who were technically alive, but had already gone somewhere else. I didn't like it then either. We handed her over to Claire in the A&E Bay at exactly 2:14 a.m. I remember the time because I wrote it down immediately, the way I always do. Claire got a porter to move her to Bay 3 and said she'd chase Dr. Hayes. Marcus and I cleared the vehicle and went back out into the fog. Neither of us spoke much on the drive back. Marcus turned the radio up slightly, which he only does when something is bothering him. I watched the fog slide past the windows and thought about the girl's arms, crossed over her chest like she'd arranged herself, like she'd been placed there. I didn't say that to Marcus. I just watched the fog. At 6 in the morning, when the shift ended, and we were doing the vehicle handover, I went inside to use the bathroom and found Claire at the nurse's station. I'd worked with Claire for 3 years by then. She's the kind of person who notices everything. The detail no one else caught, the small thing that doesn't fit. And she does it quietly, without making a fuss. She is not a woman who rattles. She was rattled. "The girl you brought in," she said before I'd even reached the desk. "Bay 3, dark hair. What about her?" "She's gone. The bay is empty, the bed's been stripped, and there is no record of admission in the system." The chart I started doesn't exist. Dr. Hayes has no memory of treating anyone matching that description tonight. I told her about my run report, official documentation, time-stamped, signed. She turned to the terminal and pulled up the dispatch logs. The call to Moorside Lane was listed. 1:34 a.m., vehicle dispatched. Patient conveyed to Milford General. The receiving note field was completely blank, as if we'd driven an empty ambulance across town and handed over nothing at all. We stood there in the corridor under the fluorescent lights, and neither of us said what we were thinking. Claire's shift wasn't over for another hour. Mine was. I told her I'd come back in the evening, that we'd figure it out, that there was probably a system error or a data entry problem somewhere. She nodded. She didn't believe me. I didn't believe me either. I went home. I slept for 4 hours and woke up at midday with the feeling of the girl's cold skin still on my fingertips. I made tea. I didn't drink, and sat at my kitchen table and looked at the run report in my hand. My handwriting, my observations, her vital signs, the time, the location. Bay 3. It was real. I was holding it. I drove back to Milford at 3 in the afternoon and found Claire in the staff room with Samuel Price. Samuel was a porter at Milford, had been for 6 years since retiring from the ambulance service. 63, careful with words, the kind of man who knew where every body was buried in that building. Metaphorically, I'd always assumed. He was sitting with both hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold, looking at the table when Claire brought me in. "Tell him what you told me," Claire said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, dark hair, young, found near Moorside Lane. "How did you know that?" I said. "Because I've seen this before." He looked up. Lily Carter, 19 years old, brought into this hospital by ambulance on the 14th of February, 2003. Carried in by 2 paramedics, who found her unresponsive against the wall of the old mill on Moorside Lane. No identification. No next of kin. She died in Bay 3 at 4 in the morning. He paused. 21 years ago, to the night. The strip light above us hummed. "Her records are sealed in the basement archive," Samuel continued. "Nora Whitfield processed the death paperwork herself. Inquest found no suspicious circumstances. Cardiac event. She was never formally identified. Nobody came looking." He set down his mug. "I was a paramedic in 2003. I was one of the 2 who brought her in." I asked him who the other one was. He looked at me for a long time before he answered. "Young lad on placement from the training college. First year. It was his 3rd shift." Samuel's voice was flat and careful. His name was Ethan Walker. The room went very still. I told him that was impossible. I told him I'd been doing my A-levels in 2003. I was 14 years old. Samuel didn't argue. He just looked at the table again. "I know what I saw," he said, "and I know what I wrote in my report." I went to the archive that evening. The filing cabinet wasn't locked. Samuel had told me it usually was, that Nora kept the key on a chain, but when I found the cabinet, it slid open without resistance, almost like it was expecting me. Lily Carter, DOB, September 3rd, 1983, admitted 2:14 a.m., February 14th, 2003. Found unresponsive on Moorside Lane, no identification, no next of kin traced. Death recorded 4:07 a.m. cardiac failure. 2 paramedics listed as the attending crew. The first name was Samuel Price. The second name was Ethan Walker. I stood in that archive room under the flickering strip light for a long time. My hands were steady. I don't know why I expected them not to be. I photographed every page. Then I noticed something clipped inside the back of the folder that I'd missed the first time. A second sheet. Thinner. Older. The paper slightly foxed at the edges. It was an incident report. filed internally, not part of the official record. It described a disturbance in Bay 3 on the night of Lily Carter's death. A second patient who had been placed in Bay 3 earlier in the evening, admitted at around 11 p.m. with minor injuries following a road traffic collision. A young man. The incident report noted that he had suffered a sudden and unexplained cardiac event during the night, was resuscitated, and later discharged with no memory of the incident. His name, listed at the top of the report in Nora Whitfield's careful administrative handwriting, was Ethan Walker. Date of birth, April 8, 1989, 14 years old. I rang my mother that night. I hadn't called her in a few weeks. Nothing unusual. We're not estranged, just the ordinary drift of adult life. I asked her, keeping my voice level, whether anything had happened in February 2003 that she remembered, whether I'd had any kind of accident or medical incident. She went quiet. Then she said, "How do you know about that?" She told me I'd been in a minor car accident with my uncle on the way back from a football match. A lorry had clipped the car on the Burnley Road. I'd been taken to Milford General with a bump to the head and kept in overnight for observation. She said it was nothing. They discharged me the next morning, and I'd been perfectly fine. She hadn't mentioned it over the years because there was nothing to mention. I asked her which ward I'd been kept in. She didn't remember. She thought it might have been A and E. I asked her if she remembered what bay. She said she hadn't been there. She'd been called at midnight and told I was fine, to come in the morning, that I'd been sleeping, that the nurses said everything was normal. I thanked her and said goodnight. I sat in my car in the Milford General car park and looked at the hospital entrance and thought about a 14-year-old boy lying in Bay 3 on the night Lily Carter died. About two hearts in the same small space, one going out and one almost following. About whether something moves between people in those moments, something that doesn't have a medical name and never will. About whether Lily Carter had been trying for 21 years to find the person who was there when she died. The person whose heartbeat she'd been closest to. The person who survived when she didn't. About whether she'd finally found him. I told Claire the next day. All of it. She listened without interrupting, which is unusual for Claire. When I finished, she said, "Daniel Cross came in this morning, the detective. Someone had reported a misper. A young woman, dark hair, mid-20s, last seen near Moorside Lane on the 14th. She looked at me carefully. He was asking about our admission records for that night. What did you tell him? That there was no admission matching that description. Because there isn't one. Because there isn't one, she agreed. Then, he said this was the third time in 7 years a report had been filed. A woman matching the same description, same location. Always the 14th of February. Always disappears before anyone can trace her. She paused. The previous 2 times, the calls were logged, but no patient was ever found. No ambulance was dispatched. I thought about that, about what it meant that this year an ambulance had been dispatched, that Marcus and I had found her, moved her, logged her, handed her over, that I had been there this time. Cross wants to speak to you, Claire said. I know, I said. I haven't spoken to him yet. I've been trying to decide what I'd say. How you explain to a detective that the girl you picked up from Moorside Lane at 1:34 in the morning may have been dead for 21 years before you got there. That the run report you're holding is real and the system record is blank, and both of those things are true simultaneously. That you were in the same room as her when you were 14 years old, in a bed 3 feet from where she died, and your heart nearly stopped. That you think she knew who you were when you found her. That you think she'd been waiting. Marcus called me last week. He'd driven past Moorside Lane on the way to a job, early hours, thick fog. He said he'd slowed down near the mill without meaning to. He said there was a girl with dark hair sitting against the wall, with her arms crossed over her chest, looking directly at his windscreen. He drove on. He said the feeling of being watched didn't leave until he was on the motorway. He asked me if he should report it. I told him no. I told him to keep driving next time. Don't slow down. Don't stop. He asked me why. I said, because she's not looking for him. The last thing I want to tell you is this. I went back to the archive last week to look at the folder one more time. I needed to see the pages again. I needed them to be real. The cabinet was locked. I found Nora Whitfield and asked her to open it. She looked at me for a moment, the long, flat look of someone deciding something. And then she said there was no folder for a Lily Carter, that the name didn't exist in the archive, that whatever I thought I'd seen, I was mistaken. I showed her the photographs on my phone, every page, her own handwriting on the incident report. She looked at the screen for a long time. Then she looked at me. "You need to stop looking into this," she said. Not unkindly, not as a threat, the way you'd say it to someone standing at the edge of something they can't see the bottom of. Some records are sealed for a reason, Mr. Walker. Some things are better left as paperwork errors and data gaps, and one strange night that nobody can quite explain. She walked away. I stood in the corridor outside the archive room and looked at the photographs on my phone. All still there. Every page, except one. The incident report, the one with my name and my date of birth, and a 14-year-old boy in Bay 3 whose heart almost stopped, was gone. I scrolled through every image twice. It wasn't there. I put my phone in my pocket and walked out through A and E and across the car park and sat in my ambulance for a while. Sophia patched through a call at 2:09 in the morning. Female, mid-20s, unresponsive. Moorside Lane. I sat with my hand on the ignition and looked at the fog sitting on the car park like something alive. And I thought about a girl with dark hair and crossed arms and eyes that caught the light and gave nothing back. And I thought about a boy in a hospital bed 21 years ago whose heart nearly followed hers. And I put the ambulance in drive because I think she's been trying to tell me something since I was 14 years old. And I think this time I'm finally ready to hear it. I just don't know yet if what she has to say is meant to save me or finish what she started. The call was logged at 2:09 a.m., vehicle dispatched at 2:11. There is no record of arrival. There is no record of a patient. There is no record of Ethan Walker returning to the depot that morning. His run report was found, folded in the seat of the ambulance. It was dated the 14th of February. The patient field was blank. In the notes section, in his handwriting, were 4 words. She was waiting for me.